Number 10. Hepzibah. Despite not being a mutant, Hepzibah became a member of the mainly mutant team of the X-Men after leaving the Starjammers. Initially she was Corsair's lover, but after being forced to part ways with the Starjammers, she would end up on Earth and join the X-Men team. Hepzibah's abilities come from her own skill set and from her alien physiology. Hepzibah is a Mephistoid, the member of an anthropomorphic skunk-like alien race. After the loss of Corsair, Hepzibah would end up becoming closer to fellow X-Men member Warpath, and would even become his lover as well in the comics. It's fine, Corsair was dead at the time. While Hepzibah was a member of the X-Men and even was recruited for a time to be on X-Force, she eventually would return to the Starjammers once her lover, Corsair, also Cyclops' Havoc's and Vulcan's father, had returned from the dead. Number 9. Egg. While Fabio Medina might be more easily recognized now that he is part of the all-important mutant team known as the Five, responsible for resurrecting fallen mutants, when he was known by his former codename of Goldballs, he would have been much less recognizable. Also, if you haven't been reading the comics for a while, you might not know that he's important now. That sounds so mean. He was important before, but he's really important now, you know what I mean? Fabio's power allows him to produce and shoot, well, gold balls from his body, each one firing off with a poink sound. However, since his time as Gold Balls, it was more recently revealed during the Dawn of X that the balls he was producing were in actuality unfertile eggs. With this revelation, he took up the name Egg and became part of the 5 most important mutants on the island nation of Krakoa. As with this newly understood power, he could create eggs which could then be made fertile and used to regrow and resurrect fallen mutants. So if you haven't heard of Egg or Gold Balls, he's a member you'll likely be more interested in knowing now. And before we move on to our next spot, just a quick reminder, if you love mutants as much as I love mutants, and I love them a lot, be sure you show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Beak. Beak's mutation ended up being slightly more unfortunate in comparison to some of the other more well-known core members of the X-Men team. Beak is Barnal Bowhusk, and his mutant powers are simply that he looks and shares similar attributes to a bird. His bones are hollow and light, meant to lend well to flying, and he has feathers which should also allow him or help him to fly, and yet he's not really a good flyer, which is kind of sad. In fact, initially Beak couldn't really fly at all when he first appeared. Now he can, but he still has to work really hard to do so, and even then he can really only fly for short distances. Other than that, Beak simply can see better than most at long range and is armed with talons and a beak, which he can obviously use to fight. But for the most part, Beak simply looks like a bird and as such is usually more on the sidelines than in the middle of the action. He did for a while have a suit, however, that enhanced his abilities and also granted him additional strength and powers, more useful for physical fighting. Number 7. Morph. Because there are multiple morphs out there, not everyone is as familiar with Benjamin Deeds as the morph who appeared in the animated X-Men series from the 90s. This version of Morph, however, is a lot less cocky in comparison to that animated series version. Benjamin Deeds is a mutant who, like the animated version, can transform into anyone else. However, his powers are a little more unique than most shapeshifters. The more time he spends with someone, the more his appearance will grow to mimic theirs, not really becoming an exact duplicate of them, but more becoming his own version of that person, which also affects how that person sees him. Using his powers also makes the person he resembles both more eager to like and to trust Morph. And actually, initially I believe Morph didn't even like that codename. They were like, you should be Morph, and he was like, meh, nah. Number 6. Thunderbird. While we haven't seen Neil Shara in a while, he was listed as a member of the X-Men in the Ten of Swords handbook, and while it's since been revealed that the X-Men were originally made defunct after Krakoa came to be during Dawn of X, they saw their return during the denouement of the Ten of Swords event in their own series, X-Men, which had been going on since Dawn of X in the comics, comically, despite the team no longer being technically recognized by the Quiet Council. So it's really weird. It's like we had an X-Men series, but like no one acknowledged that the X-Men team existed. Anyways, they're back now, sort of. Thunderbird could also appear again at some point as part of X Corporation, as Neil has also been a part of that team in the past. While he's not the most recognizable mutant to use the codename Thunderbird, Neil is still one of those mutants. His abilities allow him to convert ambient heat into solar plasma, turning his entire body into this type of plasma, which gives him a variety of abilities and powers, including emitting focused plasma beams and flight. Number 5. Cypher. You know about Cypher, but do you know about Cypher? with an I, not with a Y, just to be clear. Cypher is Elisa Tager and has powers similar to mutant Kitty Pryde. That is, she can phase, and even float or fly while in her phased state. She was part of the Gene School for Higher Learning and was initially discovered by mutant Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Zorn. Cypher also can turn herself invisible both visually and psychically. Well, almost completely invisible psychically. Almost. Immensely powerful telepaths such as Jean Grey have still been shown as being able to sense her. Although Cypher has only made a few appearances here and there in the comics, she still managed to make her way onto the Young X-Men team and has even reappeared on Krakoa. Number 4. Ink. Ink is another member of the X-Men who technically isn't a mutant. It was believed initially that his mutant ability was to gain powers from his tattoos. However, it was later revealed that it was Eric Gitter, aka Ink's tattoo artist, who was the mutant and who basically imbued Eric with these powers using his own mutant ability. Ink's tattoo artist was Leon Nunez, a mutant with no codename really, simply being known by his name or known as the tattoo artist. Ink would be recruited as one of the Young X-Men, initially believing he was working for Cyclops, but later learning he was in fact working for a disguised Donald Pierce. Ink fought alongside his fellow X-Men, but would leave the team for a time later on after discovering that he wasn't truly a mutant, when he found out where his powers really came from. When his fellow teammates needed his help, however, he would return armed with more tattoos from his artist. The Ten of Swords handbook listed him as an active member of the X-Men, so, you know. He's there, he could be back again, I don't know. I feel like I haven't seen Ink in a while, but he's out there. Number 3. Moonstone. Moonstone is someone I've wanted for a while in the MCU. She's not only the Dark Avengers stand-in for Carol Danvers as their Miss Marvel, but has also been a member of the Thunderbolts as well. So it seems doubly likely that we'll get her eventually. Norman chose Karla Sofin to become his Miss Marvel after Carol refused to join Osborn's team. Karla also would become an antagonist to Carol herself, as well as having a history with the Marvel name prior to that. I really am eager to see Captain Marvel and Moonstone face off in the MCU, so I'm really hoping that Karla does end up joining our new darker hero team that seems to be slowly forming. I can't wait.
Number 2. Mac Gargan. Spider-Man has had more than his fair share of animal-themed villains over the years, but few have had as many twists and turns in their persona as Mac Gargan, most commonly known as the Scorpion. Originally hired as a private investigator by J. Jonah Jameson to learn more about our beloved Wallcrawler, Gargan's rivalry with the Webhead ascended into supervillainry when he was paid $10,000 to undergo a procedure giving him all the proportional strength of, you guessed it, a scorpion. But that's far from the only name Gargan has gone under, as for a time he was also the host of the Venom symbiote, appearing much larger and more violent than the villain ever had before. This insane level of violence made it all the more worrying when Norman Osborn shrank down Gargan's symbiote so that he could more easily fit in as the Dark Avengers version of the beloved Spider-Man. Now, technically Mac Gargan has already appeared in Spider-Man Homecoming without any superpowers yet, but come on Marvel Studios, we need to see Nacho from Better Call Saul wearing a symbiote suit pronto.
Number 1. Iron Patriot. Yep, you maybe guessed it. Iron Patriot is probably one of my favorite Dark Avengers around and is also our number 1 spot. He also happens to be both the leader of the team and of Hammer, the organization behind the Dark Avengers. That's right, Iron Patriot is none other than Norman Osborn, who stands in as a version of the Avengers' Iron Man. Of course, he is much more sinister and obsessive than any version of Tony could ever be. And sadly, he also kind of ruined the Iron Patriot name. Poor Rhodey. Norman as Iron Patriot is not only a team member, but is also the one who ultimately decides who he wants on his team, recruiting other villains and turning them into alternate versions of superheroes. I also just selfishly want Norman Osborn in the MCU for Spider-Man because he's such a great villain overall for Spidey, but then again, he also has proven himself as a great villain just overall in the comics, so to see him as like a big bad would also be pretty cool. Number 10. Binary. Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel ended up in a fight with Rogue that left her zapped of her powers and her memories. During the tussle, Carol was thrown from the Golden Gate Bridge, but fortunately Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, showed up to save the day. Unfortunately, when Carol came to, it was apparent that her memories had been wiped. Spider-Woman reached out to the X-Men for help, and for a time, Carol Danvers became part of that team. Professor X was able to help restore Carol's memories, but her emotional attachments to those memories would remain lost. It was during during her time adventuring with the X-Men that she would become binary after a space adventure with the team saw her cross paths with the Brood, who exposed her to an evolutionary ray that tapped into her latent potential. True story. Number 9. Longshot. Longshot is a paradoxal hero. He ended up joining the X-Men after being sent to Earth by Mojo so that he would forget all that had passed before that, like the part where he almost defeated Mojo. Without his memories, Longshot showed up in the X-Men's danger room and would end up befriending them and serving as an ally and a teammate. He is the father of Shatterstar, who he had with X-Men member Dazzler, but was also made from Shatterstar's DNA, creating a paradox and a strange time loop when it comes to his origins and his creation. Longshot got his name during his time on Earth, which was given to him because of his fighting style. Longshot always taking the long shot, the less likely, more desperate path of success in fights. Longshot, however, can do this as while not a mutant but being engineered from the DNA of one, he possesses probability altering powers which grant him a bit of luck. He also has enhanced speed, strength, agility, and endurance, which he often uses to fight with using throwing knives. Longshot is also known for his super handsome powers that cause many people he meets to instantly fall for him. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder, if you love X-Men truly as much as I love X-Men, then be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here at the channel, so thank you if you already did that. Number 8. Surge. Surge grew up homeless on the streets of New York after running away from her home when her powers first manifested. Far away apparently, as she was born initially in Tokyo, and her parents still live there. Her powers cause her to absorb electricity from all nearby sources at all times, without the ability to stop, even zapping electricity out of the air. She can then discharge this energy through blasts or by using it to give herself bursts of super speed. Noriko Ashida's powers are hard for her to control and are considered volatile, which is why Beast created gauntlets for her that helped her to control them when she was later welcomed into the Xavier Institute, after initially being turned away. Number 7. Danger. Who could forget one of the most important members of the X-Men? The Danger Room. The Danger Room was a room used to help train the various members of the X-Men team, but was later revealed to be mutated technology which had evolved to become a sentient AI. So yeah, an AI mutant. Danger revealed their intelligence to Xavier when, after an upgrade and relocation facilitated by Mutant Forge, they asked, "Where am I?" Charles chose to ignore this and hide the room's sentience from the X-Men so that he could continue to use it to train his team. Pretty selfish, Professor. Danger is extremely powerful, and parallels between her and Ultron are often drawn on in the comics when it comes to all the destruction that she could be capable of. She possesses superhuman strength, stamina, and durability, as well as enhanced reflexes and agility. She can command and control other technology and use her own mass to recreate other materials and or rooms. She can also create other technology and even technological bodies if she happens to have mechanical devices, scrap, or equipment to work with. Number 6. Caliban. Caliban is believed to have gotten his name from that of the character from William Shakespeare's Tempest, often referred to as having a monstrous appearance. Poor Caliban, and also poor Caliban. Caliban is one of the members of the Morlocks, but he would later on join the X-Force and even go on to team up with the X-Men later on, despite him and the Morlocks being their frequent enemies in the past. Caliban's mutant powers increase the reaction of his fight or flight response, allowing him to manifest super strength as well as a sort of absorption and then later emission of fear. Basically, if you're feeling afraid in the moment, he can kind of like take that in and then put it back at you, or if he's feeling afraid. It's pretty useful. You're gonna be afraid, you know what I mean? These powers only appear when in this mode, however, when Caliban experiences that increase in adrenaline. He is also able to sense the presence of mutants within a nearby radius, and that's a mutant power that he has even when he's not in that fight or flight mode. Number 5. Blindfold. Blindfold is Ruth Aldine and is a possible descendant of Destiny. She was born without eyes entirely. Her mutant powers allow her to manipulate astral energy, tap into the astral plane, and grant her specific telepathic abilities, including including precognition and clairvoyance. She also has the ability to manipulate chaos factors and alter events in order to achieve a desired result, and maintains a reality warp resistance. Pretty useful. She also has some telekinetic abilities as well. Much of her power was lost to her, and she was in rough shape when she was admitted to the Xavier Institute. She had lost half her power and had her mind shattered by her brother. Blindfold had a really rough home life, and her brother Luca ended up coming home one day filled with hate for his sister and prepared to kill her with a chainsaw. When her mother stepped in to defend her, her mother was instead murdered by Luca, who blamed young Ruth's freakishness for his own actions. Luca ended up getting the death penalty for this crime, but when he died, it seemed as though his own mutant abilities manifested, causing him to shift into an astral or ghost-like form and attack Ruth. Blindfold has a close connection to Legion and would later end up in a relationship with the son of Charles Xavier. Yay! I don't know why I'm celebrating that, but I just think it's kind of a cute romance, I guess. Number 4. Triage. Triage was one of the mutants to appear after the dispersion of the Phoenix Force. Christopher Muse discovered his powers when a friend of his fell and hit her head while they were out dancing. It seemed as though she was dead until Christopher's touch seemed to heal and revive her, bringing her back to life. Eventually, he was apprehended by the police because of his miraculous healing ability, but would later be freed and recruited by the X-Men. He was one of the mutants who was captured and later killed by one using the X-gene cure after he refused to use his healing powers to help them. Triage seems to have had eternal youth and immortality as a result of his powers, in addition to being able to heal others and even reanimate the dead. Fortunately, since his death, he is one of the mutants that we have seen return by the Five on Krakoa, with him being spotted in the comics at Krakoan hotspot, the Green Lagoon. Number 3. Darkwind. X-Men teammates really do come in all shapes and sizes. Coming to us from Asgard, we have Dani Moonstar's mighty steed, Brightwind. Remember when Dani joined the Valkyrie after she lost her powers following M-Day? Yeah, it was during that time that she met and bonded with Brightwind. After leaving Asgard and returning to Earth, Brightwind came with her, but instead became known as Darkwind on Earth. So that's why I said Darkwind at the beginning of this point. By extension, he became a member of the X-Men and New Mutants along with Dani. Cute. Number 2. Ariel. Ariel is an alien from the planet known as the Coconut Grove. Her mutant power is persuasion, but due to her alien physiology, she can also teleport. Ariel herself is also related to another Ariel who visited Earth and inspired the character of the same name from William Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. There's a lot of Tempest references in my list today. Ariel, the one we're focusing on with this point, not her ancestor, also ended up on Earth after being sent there on a mission to collect samples from the mutants of Earth for her people to study. They themselves had reached an evolutionary standstill as such, and were curious about the Earth mutants and their evolutionary process. It was during her time on Earth that she would meet up with and join the Fallen Angels, and later on in San Francisco would end up meeting the X-Men team and joining them for a time. Number 1. Sunpyre. You know Sunfire, but do you know Sunpyre? Sunpyre was Shiro Yoshida's younger sister, Leu. She also had powers and an attitude similar to her brothers, and first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 392 in 2001. For those unfamiliar with Sunfire's or Sunpyre's abilities, both siblings possess the mutant ability of solar flare, which allows them to absorb solar radiation and convert it into superheated plasma. Using this ability, they could both cover their body in flame as they became like a flying, human-shaped sun. Sunpyre can use her power to emit plasma blasts and give off intense solar heat. Leu is one of the mutants who answered a psychic call to help defeat Magneto and save Professor X. After helping out the X-Men in that adventure, she'd later appear again as a member of the X-Corps. It is believed she died in action when the other members of X-Corps turned on her because Mastermind, Martinique Wingard, working in league with Mystique, was controlling them.
Number 10. Thunderbird. aka John Proudstar, Thunderbird made his comic book debut in Giant Size X-Men issue 1, and during his childhood on the Apache Reservation in Camp Verde, Arizona, John wasn't like the other kids on the reservation. He grew up extremely strong and he became an athlete, and at just the age of 20 his mutant powers manifested when he wrestled a charging bison with his bare hands. That's a lot of strength. Now this earned him fame on the reservation, so much so that Charles Xavier caught wind of the young man through Cerebro and invited him to join the X-Men. The first mission John took was actually the rescue of the original X-Men from Krakoa. Xavier then gave him the nickname Thunderbird. Now, Apocalypse experimented on Thunderbird and transformed him into the Horseman of War at one point. Now, fortunately, this didn't last forever as he broke free of Apocalypse's mind control and began getting his life back together. You can find all of this in Exiles issue 1. And before we go on to number 9, guys, if you haven't already, you can go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. It really does help our studio out a lot. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for supporting Top 10 Nerd. Now back to this list. Number 9, Wither. Making his first appearance in New Mutants Volume 2, Issue 3, Wither, aka Kevin Ford, grew up thinking he was cursed, or he was the most unlucky person on the planet. His mutant powers started to manifest, and he noticed it first in his plants and then on his clothes. See, his plants would die and his clothes would start to fade away. They would start to decay, almost wither away. Now we get it. Now, his father tried to calm him down once he realized this, but coming into contact with Kevin, well, you could have guessed what happens. He was soon discovered and was invited to join Xavier's Institute to learn how to control his wild powers of organic decay. He got close with Wallflower, aka Laurie Collins, but in the House of M storyline, he touched her arm and crippled her. He ran away hurt and was soon met by Selene, the Black Queen, and she invited Wither to join her circle, and he gladly accepted. Number 8. Polaris. She's a powerful mutant who came to control magnetism, and she made her first appearance in X-Men 49 as Lorna Dane. But then in issue 97, she was Polaris. Cerebro identified her as a mutant when she stepped out of the shower and had green hair. So Iceman had a crush on her when she was part of the team, but she was in love with Havoc. Her powers are of course similar to Magneto's, but she lost them after the M-Day event as well. So when Apocalypse came into the picture, he also restored her powers as she was deemed the Horseman Pestilence. She was saved by her lover man Havoc and was also healed of Apocalypse's mind control. So again, didn't last too long, but definitely did see enough dark days. Number 7, Glob Herman. Glob Herman, aka Robert Herman, made his debut in New X-Men issue 117, and he grew up with a father who despised mutants a lot. So already we're off to a promising start. So when Glob mutated, his father was just not having it. So much so that his mother drove out Glob to Westchester and left him for Professor X. See, this mutation was interesting. His skin was this transparent living wax, which he's able to maintain being on fire, which is kind of cool. He runs with the New Mutants now, but at one point he did join the Omega Gang, led by Kid Omega, and they made their own stand for mutant rights. See, Glob wasn't a fan of the school, and he also had a grudge by the way that his father treated him. So he had a pretty harsh take on how to treat humans. Poor Glob. I mean, he had a rough childhood, not exactly his fault here at all. Number 6, Kid Omega. Okay, that guy that I just mentioned, of course, I'll fill you in a little bit on him as well and what gang that he was a part of. Quintavious Quinton Quirinius made his first appearance in X-Men issue 134, and he has been described as one of the most powerful telepaths, one of the most strongest mutants ever besides Jean Grey. He was once the host of the Phoenix Force as well, so that should give you any indication. He was one of Xavier's prized pupils until he put together the Omega Gang, which was a gang that takes out humans for the crimes they committed against mutants. He even went to a tattoo shop to get him and the gang tattoos of an Omega symbol to put over top of the X-Men symbol. So they weren't playing around here. I mean, at least try wash off tattoos first. I mean, give it some thought, you know, those things are forever. Number 5, Banshee. Making his first appearance in X-Men issue 28, Sean Cassidy was born as the heir to the castle and estate of Cassidy Keep in Ireland. Professor Xavier asked him to join the X-Men at the same time as Thunderbird, and they both stayed as members of the new X-Men. He went on to train the new generation of X-Men and Generation X, but was killed during Deadly Genesis when he tried to stop the Blackbird from crashing when it was taken over. Banshee remained one of the unliving until the Apocalypse twins resurrected him using the Death Seed, thus becoming the Horseman of Death himself. Later on, he ended up in the custody of the X-Men when Beast thought it was best to put him in a coma until the healing of Death Seed energy is complete. Number 4, Jubilee. Making her first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 244, Jubilee, aka Jubilation Lee, first discovered her mutant powers of generating this blinding and explosive blast from her hands. She was discovered by Dazzler, Cyclops, Rogue, and Storm during a rescue at the mall. And when she followed the women through the portal, she ended up at the X-Men's temporary base in the Australian outback. So she stayed there hiding, and then when the Reavers captured Wolverine and took over their base, she borrowed the X-Men's clothes and made a suit for herself, so she went and rescued rescued Wolverine and aided him back to health. She's already an X-Men, look at that, just like that. So Jubilee and Wolverine ended up becoming a good pair, working missions together, and then a vampire ended up infecting the area of Union Square and Curse of the Mutants, and Jubilee, being caught in the path of this infection, ended up becoming a vampire herself. And in perfect harmony, she in the story ends up infecting Wolverine during her bloodthirsty time. And he was coming back to rescue her as well when it all happened. She's kept in a holding cell where Wolverine is really the only X-Men saying that they should keep her alive. So rough times, rough times. Number 3, Vision. Even though the MCU will have you thinking that Vision was made by the Avengers to take out Ultron, it was really the other way around. Hank Pym's least favorite kid would make the android as a tool to take out the Avengers. I guess he didn't feel like getting his hands dirty that day. Okay. Well, he should have done a better job at programming the damn thing, because while fighting the Avengers, Vision decides to swap sides and teaming up with the good guys, which in the end seems to be the worst possible thing that could happen for Ultron. You build something to kill the Avengers, but then it turns on you, and then the Avengers are now stronger, but then all the secrets that this machine knows about you will be leaked to them. But now Vision has become one of the most famous members of the Avengers, with him and Wanda starring in the new WandaVision TV show on Disney+. And don't worry if you haven't gotten around to watching that yet. I'm not going to ruin anything for you, but you definitely should go and watch it right now. We're only 3 episodes in, so you got time to catch up before it ends. Plenty of time. Number 2, Black Widow. I mean, her name is Black Widow, so I mean, that's not usually how heroes are named unless they're an anti-hero, the Punisher, you know? It should be no surprise that she's super sneaky, and she actually used to be one of Iron Man's greatest villains. The Black Widow started out as an agent sent over from Russia to bring down one of the founding members of the Avengers. It's kind of weird to think that in Marvel universes that would be developed down the line, she would be one of the founding members. It's awesome. But the villain was just so popular that nobody wanted to see her go. And after the Cold War ended, the story of a Russian agent that was sent over to dismantle a part of America that everybody loved just wasn't as compelling as it once was. And number 1, Doctor Doom. Now I know this is only for a limited time, but it's still so wild that it deserves a spot on this list, a very high spot on this list. We're talking about the same Doctor Doom that once was ruling Battleworld, the same Doctor Doom that stole Odin's powers, the same guy. He's one of the biggest, baddest villains that gives Thanos a run for his money with the amount of schemes that he's pulled. Well, there was a time when Victor Von Doom suffered a pretty serious blow to the head, an injury that would take out most people, but we're not talking about most people, are we? Valeria came through to fix up Doom's brain, and not long after that, he was working with the good guys. Right around this time, Tony was in a deep coma, so someone needs to step in the role of Iron Man, and who better than Doctor Doom himself? Having Doom become Iron Man for that brief moment was one of the coolest moments ever, hands down.
Number 10, Bullseye. What do you do when you have a supervillain whose power is being able to hit practically any target? Well, you have him replace a superhero who can pretty much do the same. Bullseye, a mysterious assassin who we still don't even know the full name of beyond Lester Somebody, is most well known for frequently clashing with Daredevil and being under the employ of Kingpin. However, after using his sociopathic talents during the Skrull invasion and aiding the Thunderbolts, Bullseye was given the position of being a replacement Hawkeye, a position he kept threatening to lose as his murder sprees began drawing more and more attention to the villainous side of Osborn's Avengers team. Who knows, maybe we'll get a season 2 of the Disney Plus Hawkeye show and get to see an evil Hawkeye on screen after all.
Number 9, Toxie. Toxie is one of the worst there is out there. She is June Covington, a post-grad who was working at NYU and became obsessed with perfecting the human genetic code. She succeeded in doing so and aimed to use her research to fix a man who she found to be perfect except for a birth defect in his arm. In issue number 1 of Osborn, we learned that the man, Edward Wynn, would however refuse her help and attempt to have her imprisoned for her extreme research methods and basically eugenics-focused science. But she'd get back at him later on. Claiming to have changed her ways, she lured him to her lab, paralyzed him, and then left him trapped there to rot. Toxie ends up joining the Dark Avengers team following Norman Osborn's escape from the raft. She becomes the new Scarlet Witch of his team and also ends up romantically involved with Norman, despite initially showing disinterest in him the first time they met when she was drumming up money to fund her research.
Number 8, Ares. Tell me if you've heard this one before. The gods of one of mankind's most well-spread mythologies are actually advanced beings from their own unique pocket dimension, so powerful and advanced compared to the people of Earth that we can only qualify them as godlike. Well, this is the explanation given in the Marvel Universe for both the Greek and Norse gods, and perhaps that's why Norman Osborn was able to use them so interchangeably when searching for a replacement Thor. While the Greek god of war Ares had been on good terms with of the Avengers before Osborn was placed in charge, he was one of the few superpowered beings who saw nothing wrong with the change in leadership and would go on to lead the Dark Avengers assault on Asgard. Asgard may be gone in the MCU already, but that doesn't mean I'm still not itching to see Thor and Loki take on another Pantheon's god. Bring it on, Marvel.
Number 7. Aya Peak. Aya Peak is one of the alternate darker versions of Spider-Man. Overall, a pretty deadly and cool character inspired by an actual worshipped and feared deity of the Mochi civilization, which flourished in northern Peru from the 1st to 8th century CE. Pretty neat stuff. Aya Peak ended up joining Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers team that was assembled after he escaped the raft. I think he'd be a cool character to have for his overall appearance. He has like snakes for hair, fangs, and a spider-like body with multiple limbs, but he'd also just be cool to act as an anti-Spider-Man, being literally a man, or well, god really, who is part spider but is known for his more cruel and violent approach. His name is really Aya Peak the Decapitator, so yeah. Also, what's up with Dark Avengers and gods? Apparently that's a thing.
Number 6. Scar. You might have heard that the Hulk briefly lived as a gladiator on the distant world of Sakaar, but did you know that in the comics he wound up actually having a son from this adventure? The offspring of the Hulk and Kyera the Old Strong, Scar's mother died so that he might live during the destruction of his planet, and eventually made his way back to Earth following in his father's footsteps. While initially seen as a threat by many of the world's heroes, Scar wound up being one of the few Dark Avengers to redeem himself. He was secretly a double agent for Steve Rogers all along, right under Norman Osborn's nose. The Hulk's always been one of my favorite characters in the MCU, and seeing him deal with father and son issues would bring a whole lot of drama to everyone's favorite universe, and I personally can't wait.
Number 5. Daken. I mean, we should probably get Wolverine and the rest of the mutant crew in the MCU first, but as soon as they are in, this is one of the people I want immediately thereafter. Daken is the son of Wolverine, who actually currently goes by his given name of Akihiro in the comics. Daken was actually a cruel nickname that Akihiro initially just adopted as his own. Daken in Japanese basically translates to cur or mongrel in English, and was used in reference to the fact that Akihiro was mixed race. His mother was a Japanese woman, Itsu, who was murdered before she could give birth to him, and his father was Wolverine, who believed that their unborn child had also been killed along with his wife, and therefore did not know that he'd actually been stolen and survived following Itsu's death, which was pretty awkward later. Daken was raised to hate his father and would grow up to become a villain and specifically an enemy to Wolverine. Norman would recruit Daken to become his stand-in Wolverine for his Dark Avengers team, which I love.
Number 4. Ragnarok. We've already had one Thor replacement on this list, but luckily the Dark Avengers were having a buy one get one free sale and threw in an evil cyborg clone as a bonus. Eventually going under the apocalyptic Norse moniker of Ragnarok, this clone was originally made by Tony Stark, based off a strand of hair that the billionaire stole after his first encounter with the Asgardian. During the events of Civil War, Tony unleashed this mad clone as a deterrent against the anti-registration side of the conflict, and received a ton of backlash when the clone wound up being more powerful than intended and eventually had to be destroyed by the god Hercules. Nevertheless, cyborg clones just don't die, and Ragnarok was given his new codename as a member of the Dark Avengers and lending muscle to Norman Osborn's new reign of terror. Could you imagine seeing this guy in the MCU? I'm sure Chris Hemsworth is down for playing double the roles, right?
Number 3. Storm. Storm actually joined up after my number 2 was on the team. We'll talk about them in a minute, no spoilers, but see if you can guess, based on this timing, who is going to be next. Storm ended up joining during Bendis' run on Avengers in 2012 in issue 19 on that run. She was actually recommended to the team when Captain America attempted to re-recruit Black Panther. Now Black Panther said he just wasn't interested at the time, he just wasn't feeling it, and when Cap explained his reason for needing Black Panther as wanting friendly faces, T'Challa told him that what he thought the team needed actually was just more firepower. What Cap needed in his opinion was his wife, Storm. And so Storm answered the call, ended up joining the team for a time. She was even prominently featured on the cover for issue 21. I love this cover, it's just so cool. I think Storm should be on every team. Storm should lead every team, that's what I think. Number 2. Wolverine. Wolverine has been part of both the main Avengers team and the Avengers Unity division, being as popular as a member of the X-Men as he is. I'm actually surprised it took Marvel as long as it did to include him on the team after the Avengers became this sort of ever-expanding team that just had so many branches and card-carrying former members as well as rotating members and honorary members. It just has become There's a lot of Avengers. Wolverine was invited to officially join the Avengers in the 2005 New Avengers series in issue number 6, after Cap and Iron Man had a brief discussion about whether or not Wolverine would be a suitable pick for the team. Steve was concerned that Wolverine was a murderer and therefore not suited, but Tony insisted, saying that he was their missing ingredient, the thing that their new team needed. And also he was like, he's not a murderer, he's a samurai. Or maybe a murderer and a samurai. I think you can be both. I don't know, can you be both? Is that dishonorable? Apologies to any samurai watching this. Number 1. Beast. We've seen Beast featured on the Secret Avengers team, but like me, you may have forgotten that he is essentially a core member of the Avengers, first becoming a probationary member in the Avengers Volume 1 in issue 137, and then gaining full membership in issue 151. Beast was likely the first X-Men member to become a full member of the main team, and although I tend to forget about it because he goes just so far back, he's essentially a core member, or he was a core member for quite a while. If you're wondering how exactly Beast ended up on the Avengers team when the X-Men and Hank's ties to them are so prominent, it was actually just some good timing in terms of what was going on in the comics. X-Men's original run actually ended in 1970 due to the series being cancelled. X-Men would return, but not until the mid-70s. Issue 137 of the Avengers, featuring Beast as a new member on probation, came out in July of 1975. For Hank, this was just after he'd been transformed into the big, bouncing blue beast that we have come to love today. X-Men returned a few months later in August, with Chris Claremont starting his run in issue 94 of X-Men. In other words, the X-Men team being defunct provided some freedom for Beast to join the Avengers, and writers kinda just liked the idea of him working on the team and probably just also loved his look, so it happened. And there was no X-Men at the time, so made sense. Number 10. Deadpool. If you talk to Wade, he'd consider himself a member, or at the very least former member, of the X-Men. He'd be wrong, but that's how he would likely see it, so for that I'm gonna count him. And there was a time, however, when he did at least appear to hold a probationary status with them, when Cyclops thought it might be better to keep a closer eye on Wilson, who wanted to join up at the time, rather than let him besmirch the name of mutants everywhere with his unchecked actions. That of course didn't last very long, but he has also been a member of the mutant team X-Force. When it comes to joining the Avengers, he's been on a few different Avengers teams. One of his most recent appearances was when he joined Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel's War Avengers in War of the Realms. He's also been a member of Steve Rogers' Captain America's all-new, all-different Avengers, and I don't really know how much more Avengery it gets than serving under Captain America. Avengery, is that a word? It's not, but it is now. Number 9. Kid Omega. Some people don't like to count the West Coast Avengers, but I certainly do. They're just so fun. Of course, one of the recruits on this team is none other than fan favorite Kid Omega, aka Quentin Quire, the character who has a habit of dying repeatedly on Krakoa currently as part of the Dawn of X line. Kid Omega joined up with Kate Bishop's West Coast Avengers at the beginning of Kelly Thompson's run in 2018. This run, by the way, is just wacky and delightful, and if you have yet to check it out yet, I highly recommend it. Number 8. Cannonball. Cannonball was recruited to the Avengers after the events of Avengers vs. X-Men. Captain America felt during those events the Avengers had in a way let their mutant friends down and could have done more to help them. In an attempt to move past this former conflict and foster more community and trust between the two superhero groups, he recruited Cannonball along with Sunspot to join the Avengers. I always feel like Sunspot makes more of a splash, so I thought it might be nice to also acknowledge Sam's appearance here as a character and often underrated mutant hero. Sam has not only worked alongside the X-Men team, but is also one of the founding members of the New Mutants team as well. Ka-ching! Number 7. X-23. While Laura Kinney may not have been part of the main Avengers team, she was part of the Avengers Academy. She joined up after the events of Fear itself, and during her time there bested Tigra in a sparring match, proving even more so that X-23 would make a deadly addition to the Avengers team someday, should they ever want to recruit her on a more permanent level. X-23, currently known as Wolverine, is a genetic female clone of Logan, created using his genetic material and that of her own creator and birth mother, Sarah Kinney. Laura was raised to be a killing machine, a skillful trained assassin, but ended up escaping the facility and company who raised and used her. Since finding Logan, her genetic father in a way, and the X-Men, she has served on multiple different heroic mutant teams. Number 6. Havoc. Havoc was one of the members of the Uncanny Avengers, composed of a weird mishmash of characters, mutants and non-mutants alike, who initially united to take down the superpowered Red Skull, now armed with the mind of Charles Xavier. Havoc joined the team in the first issue of the series, despite being a conflicting character when it came to his usually unstable alignment. Havoc has been on both sides of the spectrum, being a hero at times and a villain at others, and sometimes he just gets lost in between the two labels, like he appears to be currently in the comics, on the brink of almost losing his sanity. Poor Havoc. Honestly, so much terrible things have happened to Alex, and I just feel really bad for him. His time starting out with the X-Men was also initially pretty traumatic during the time he spent avoiding joining Xavier's school or team. However, eventually he did end up acquiescing and joining them, happy there for a time before Madeline Pryor came around and, well, corrupted him. Number 5. Magneto. For those who think Magneto is just an evil mutant who is born enemy to the X-Men, he has also spent quite a bit of time working alongside them as well. Most notably, Magneto was actually a leader of the New Mutants team while working alongside the X-Men. Despite the fact that he and Charles haven't always seen eye to eye, even Professor X knows that Eric can be a powerful ally. So, how did he make his way onto the Avengers? Well, this of course happened during the Axis event. After many major heroes had their alignments inverted, Magneto was one of the superpowered now heroes to be recruited into that temporary, technically non-official Avengers team. Number 4. Rogue. Rogue joined the Uncanny Avengers in issue number 4 of the 2012 series. She would become the field leader for the Avengers Unity Division. She was first approached by Wanda Maximoff, aka Scarlet Witch, who asked her to stick around on the team after Rogue helped them out in issue 4. This was also the same issue that Scarlet Witch joined, and of course was after both the events of M-Day and after Wanda had just been used as a pawn by Red Skull, who at this point was immensely powerful after stealing Xavier's brain and gaining his immense psionic power. Super comics, I know, stealing someone's brain, but here we are. So there was a lot of tension between these two women, but Rogue ultimately did decide to stay on the team. Now, not because Wanda asked her to though, and because she wanted to move on, but because she knew it would be what Professor X would have wanted, and because she basically didn't trust Wanda or her powers and wanted to stick around to keep an eye on her and to prevent her from making a giant mess of this whole situation, which she felt was all Wanda really knew how to do. Ouch. Poor Wanda, she can never catch a break. Number 3. Slipstream. On my previous list I talked about the mutant known as Lifeguard, but now it's time to focus on her brother, who is also a mutant, don't you know? Davis Cameron, aka Slipstream. While his sister Heather worked as an actual lifeguard in Australia, Davis himself was a surfer. His powers weren't activated until later in his life and were actually awoken by Sage after his sister went missing, and it was revealed his latent mutant abilities could be used to help find and then rescue her. Slipstream's abilities allow him to create quantum portals, which can transport him and any passengers he takes along with him across great distances. However, it should be noted it requires a lot of concentration for him to bring others along with him. He can also track previous teleportations, allowing him to use these warp wave abilities to find his way to the destination and location of teleporters that he's tracking. Which I think is a pretty useful ability, tracking teleporters, because they're tricky. Number 2. Spider-Girl. Well, not naturally born, but kinda made in a lab, Spider-Girl made a single appearance in Avenging Spider-Man issue 16. She had similar powers to Spider-Man, but was made of a combination of spider and mutant DNA by the Jackal, using materials found in Mr. Sinister's lab. Wow, the Jackal in Mr. Sinister's lab just sounds like such a dangerous thing. As such, she also had the additional powers to shapeshift into a giant spider with 5 human eyes. While in this shape, she also had the power to spit purple mucus and even fire optic blasts from her eyes. Makes you think there might be some Summers DNA mixed in there, which honestly, if we're talking about Mr. Sinister's lab, I wouldn't be surprised. She ended up rampaging across the city of New York after the Jackal released her as part of a test. Fortunately, she was apprehended by Superior Spider-Man and the X-Men, who explained that she seemed to be a mutant and ended up taking her in after defeating her. We never really heard anything about her after that. Spider-Girl was created by Christopher Yost and Paco Medina. Who knows, maybe we'll see her again, I don't know. Number 1, Forget-Me-Not. Despite the fact that Forget-Me-Not is someone you definitely forget, you may have heard us talk about him on the channel before, because his powers are just so interesting. But for those who haven't heard of him or have simply forgotten him, let's give you a little refresher course. Forget-Me-Not is an X-Men member whose mutant power is that no one can ever remember him. This makes it easier for him to basically infiltrate places, but it makes it harder for him to ever connect with anyone, make a friend, or even have his teammates remember that he's actually on the team. This is why Forget-Me-Not is also usually left off of the official rosters for the team, and why you might never really see his name mentioned there, ever. Forget-Me-Not's psychic powers that enable him to go unnoticed and remain forgotten were actually so strong that even Professor Xavier struggled to remember him, and as it was revealed in X-Men Legacy issue 300, had to place within his mind a psychic hourly reminder just so he wouldn't forget permanently about Forget-Me-Not's existence. If you're wondering what happened to Forget-Me-Not in the end, he was forgotten. So, yeah.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Hawkeye. As funny as it might sound to put Hawkeye first on a list about dangerous Avengers members, he's not to be messed with. And in the MCU, Hawkeye's had it pretty rough. He had his mind controlled in the first Avengers, he took out eyeballs for Loki, yuck. And then he comes out of retirement for like 2 hours, comes Civil War, and then he gets arrested and sent to the Raft. And then his family disappears. So we catch up with Clint 5 years after Thanos snapped his dirty fingers, and we find him in Tokyo, and he's not the same guy that we once knew at all. He's taken out criminals, this time he's doing it the hard way, and he's suited up as a different character altogether. He's back this time as Ronin. And this is a dark time. He takes out so many people, and he takes them out violently as well. He uses his skills to do it in such a brutal assassin way. I mean, I know you're upset because your entire family disappeared while you were eating hot dogs with mayo. That's fair, but so was the rest of the world, okay? They were affected too. Stick to the arrow, leave the hood and the sword down. Stay Hawkeye, stay nice. And before we continue on with this list of dangerous Avenger members, guys, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would mean a lot. It helps this channel out so much. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Now let's get right back into this list. Number 9, Bucky Barnes. Near the end of World War II, Bucky and Cap were trying to disarm a bomb on a plane while taking down Baron Zemo. Now the bomb went off, hurling Steve and Bucky into the freezing waters, and well, as for Cap, you know his story. He remained frozen, came back out of the ice years later, still mentally and physical at his peak, but this wasn't the case for Bucky. His body fell into the freezing waters, and at the time, a Soviet spy submarine was in the area crossing between the English Channel, so they scooped him up, made him a fancy new metal arm, brainwashed him, and turned him into a brutal assassin with the help of Hydra's own super soldier serum. He joined the Avengers officially in the New Avengers issue 48. Now, Bucky is of course considered an Avenger now in the MCU, but during the Civil War storyline, we saw just how brutal he could be as an assassin. He took out all of the Avengers once he broke out with Zemo's help. Number 8, Sentry. He made his first appearance in Sentry issue 1. Meet Robert Reynolds. He was a struggling addict who made his way into a laboratory and discovered something called the Golden Sentry Serum. And then he got the surprise of a lifetime when he was given the power of 1 million exploding suns. Now that plus a homemade costume equals superhero. Sounds pretty good. But he's a quite dangerous superhero. I mean, of course, the whole million sun thing. Robert fought alongside the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and then of course, the New Avengers. Things changed for Robert when Norman Osborn decided to put together a team of his own. This was the Dark Avengers where he made the switch. Sentry's a pretty powerful being as well. I mean, he was once a horseman of death, where he even considered himself as the heir to Apocalypse, so he's up there. Number 7, Wolverine. James Howlett, a Canadian mutant and popular member of the X-Men who we all should know by now. He describes himself as being the best at what he does, but what he does isn't very nice. He has an accelerated healing factor, sharp senses, sharp claws, and of course the adamantium coating on his bones thanks to the Weapon X program. So the claws are what make Logan unique. He is a fierce, brutal warrior with them, and he has the rage of a beast and the soul of a samurai. Put that all together and you have quite a fierce Avenger. He joined the Avengers in New Avengers issue 6. He obtains the Muramasa blade, and so begins his quest for revenge. He's pretty dangerous too, the whole healing factor, the rage, his memories coming and going. I'm really hoping that with Deadpool 3 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, now that Marvel has him back, I really hope we can see the Avengers recruit these mutants on the big screen as well. It'd be fun to see them together. After all, Deadpool 3 was supposed to be a road trip with them too as well, so we gotta see somewhat of a version of that. Number 6, Mockingbird. Barbara Morse made her comic book debut in Astonishing Tales issue 12. She studied at Georgia Institute of Technology, specializing in biology, and she worked with Dr. Wilma Calvin on Project Gladiator. Now the project was set to recreate the super soldier serum that created Captain America. Everybody was trying this. It worked and failed multiple times. But during this time, S.H.I.E.L.D. trained Bobby to be a spy. They also gave her the cool nickname of Agent 19. I mean, yeah, she was so good at gymnastics and flips, It would be stupid not to make her a superhero at this point. So she became Mockingbird in the 80s with Marvel Team Up issue 95. In 2011, she became a super soldier in New Avengers 13, so she finally has powers. When she was on the verge of dying, she was injected with this other version of the serum, and it saved her, thankfully. But it of course also gave her new super soldier abilities. She's skilled in hand-to-hand combat, like Kung Fu and Taekwondo, and she's known to be pretty dangerous when fighting in close quarters, of course being familiar in weaponry as well. She was one of the founding members of the West Coast Avengers, but she also was part of the New Avengers and the Secret Avengers as well. So she's been around for quite a bit. Fans actually got their hope up that Barbara would appear in the MCU. They actually thought Erin Kellyman was Mockingbird, but alas, she was revealed to be Flag Smasher, or leader of the Flag Smashers in the MCU. Number 5, She-Hulk. Jennifer Walters made her comic book debut in Savage She-Hulk issue 1. She's a brilliant lawyer who just happened to be the cousin of Bruce Banner. So when she was shot by Nicholas Trask, yeah, she was shot while she was defending a criminal who had been double-crossed by Trask. And she was also spreading rumors that she had enough evidence to lock away Trask, so he lashed out and shot her. So now, in order to save her life, a blood transfusion was required from none other than her family, the Hulk himself. She joined the Avengers in issue 221. Now, what makes Jen Walters stand out as a Hulk is that she's able to control her abilities, unlike Bruce. Tatiana Mason Lee is actually set to play the powerful Avenger in Disney's upcoming She-Hulk, set to release in 2022, and I can't wait to see how powerful she is on the big screen as well. Number 4, US Agent. John Walker, perhaps one of the most dangerous members to ever join the Avengers ranks. We're seeing this unfold currently in the MCU in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So this war hero in the show was nominated to become the replacement of Steve Rogers, and this happened in the comics as well. This happened when Steve Rogers had to abandon his identity due to the Red Skull's manipulation of the Commission on Superhuman Activities. So somebody had to suit up, so the government needed this new figure, and in issue 333 of Captain America, titled The Replacement, we saw just who that was. He took on the role of Captain America briefly, but after he left, he returned again, but this time in his own version of a blacked out Captain America suit, and the shield is also less spangly. He comes back as US Agent and he's put to the test. He's forced to battle an Ironmonger, and he wants to take it down alone, because, you know, he's cool. The shield seems to work out for him pretty well, and in the comics, it was actually Taskmaster who trained him how to properly use that shield, who we have yet to see in the MCU because Black Widow is still delayed. Now yes, eventually he did join the Avengers. In West Coast Avengers issue 45, the government wanted an official in there to make sure all was running smoothly, so they sent in John Walker. I feel like the finale for Falcon and the Winter Soldier is going to be the introduction of the Thunderbolts, and I really hope US Agent joins a version of the Dark Avengers, because he's an amazing actor. I'm not quite done with him yet. Number 3, Quicksilver. The twin brother of Wanda Maximoff. I figured it was a great time to mention this speedy Avenger. Pietro Maximoff is the twin brother of Wanda, and in Avengers West Coast issue 57, he joined the team. Now, Pietro had been trouble for the team for a while now. I mean, he convinced Wanda to do what she did in the House of M storyline. He's framed the Avengers for treason at one point, and he was fully okay with exposing his daughter Luna to Terrigen. He's kind of the worst. That's actually how Luna got her abilities, but still, bad parenting 101. In West Coast Avengers issue 33, Magneto's bloodline got the best of him, and he got fellow Avengers captured by the communist gang. Even in the MCU, Quicksilver was first introduced as a villain. He and Wanda were actually both Team Hydra in the start. Now his super speed is not to be toyed with. He's quite powerful. In Marvel Zombies, Quicksilver gets tricked by Mystique, he gets bit, and then with his incredible speed powers, he's able to turn everybody into zombies all around the world within minutes. The situation went from bad to unstoppable thanks to Quicksilver. Number 2, Scarlet Witch. She's a daughter of Magneto and the twin brother of Quicksilver, who I just mentioned, so now's a pretty good time to mention her as well. She was on her father's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but most of us would consider Wanda one of the strongest Avengers. She's one of the biggest Marvel characters ever, and during those events of M-Day, she spoke 3 words: no more mutants. And just like that, a mass amount of mutants were depowered, or worse. Now that large number was 986,000, so only leaving a couple hundred left. In the MCU as well, we just watched Wanda go through quite the trauma. In WandaVision, we saw this over the course of 9 weeks, where she had a mental breakdown kind of similar to M-Day, and she trapped Westview in her hex. Now, of course, by the end of the show, she frees everybody and things look pretty back to normal-ish, but with that after-credit scene of her studying the Darkhold, and with the given knowledge that Wanda is in the next Doctor Strange movie, I feel like we've only scratched the surface of the Scarlet Witch's true abilities. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Vision. Of course, Wanda's hubby, android hubby. The Vision is an advanced android to say the least. I mean, he came back from the dead in WandaVision and now he's matching his West Coast Avengers look more than ever, that all-white android look. He was first introduced in Avengers issue 57, created by Ultron using parts of the original Human Torch and the mind of Wonder Man. a little different than the MCU. He then turned on his original creator and joined the Avengers. In the MCU, he's created for Ultron's new body, but with the addition of the Mind Stone and a little bit of Jarvis, we now have this android Avenger. But during the Secret Empire storyline, Vision was part of Hydra's Avengers when they were taking over the world. He used an AI virus to take him over, he being Arnim Zola. A robot gone rogue is quite compelling, especially when he's as strong as the Vision. In the first issue, he's put to the test when the other Avengers are fighting him. He's easily able to take them all on. As long as he's on the good side, we should be okay. Otherwise, it's just gonna be a hot mess. Number 10, Scarlet Witch. So many of us like to see the Scarlet Witch as this misunderstood magic user that is just looking for love. Well, she used to be one of the original members of the Brotherhood of Evil. She was teamed up with Magneto right from the start, and for years she thought her powers were only mutant powers. I mean, it made sense her brother Quicksilver was a mutant and the two of them were both working for Magneto. He was a mutant and everybody they were fighting was also a mutant. But after Scarlet Witch and her brother decided to part ways from the Brotherhood, they would decide that they needed to start using their powers for good and join the Avengers. It's wild how in comic books you can go from domestic terrorist to hero like that fast. It's incredible. But even after Scarlet Witch would decide to be a hero, it wouldn't be the last time she would do something to hinder nearly every hero in the world. And of course I'm referring to the infamous M-Day would have Scarlet Witch use her powers to rewrite reality and see it to that the mutants are nearly extinct. This was partly caused by her relationship with Magneto, who's her dad, and a very not great dad, I can also say. And before we go to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up on this video because it does go a long way for our channel. Helps us out quite a bit. You guys are the best. Now back to some Avengers who used to be villains. Number 9, Wonder Man. It's hard to know in the Marvel Universe when you're being tricked because everyone has got a plan up their sleeve, even the good guys. But if you're working with a tactical Baron von Zemo, then you better believe that he's doing something dirty behind the scenes. See, Wonder Man used to just be a regular working class man. Actually, his story is nearly identical to that of the Vulture in the MCU. He's a working man. Stark puts him out of the business and then he has to do whatever he can to try and make ends meet. So eventually he's given the option to use advanced tech to get back at the people who wronged him, and he loves the idea of that. I mean, I'm kind of on board with that too, let's do it. That opportunity would come back when Baron von Zemo would approach him with a proposition. He would give Wonder Man, who was then just Simon Williams, the power of ionic energy so he could have the power to crush Iron Man. But partway through his anger faded and he decided that taking on Iron Man wasn't the answer after all. So the two of them turned on Baron von Zemo. But here's the catch. The Baron isn't going to get caught with his pants down. He had Poison Williams who would soon die after. So his hero life was short-lived because once you die in comics, you are dead forever. Moment of silence. Only for a bit because he came back later on. Yeah, he came back. He was brought from the dead and is now a registered member of the Avengers. So, welcome back. Number 8, The Winter Soldier. You should know the story of the Winter Soldier by now. If you've not seen that movie yet, please go check it out because it's arguably the best movie in the MCU. And the story of the Winter Soldier has more flip-flops than a beach in Florida. The Winter Soldier was formerly Bucky Barnes, the best friend and right-hand man of Captain America. A tragic accident would have him fall to his death, or so Steve Rogers thought. It turns out Hydra got a hold of him and used some experimental tech to not only give him one of the most badass robotic arms that I've ever seen, but they also brainwashed him to be a living weapon. They used his advanced war training and then embedded him with Hydra assassination techniques. He was then frozen over and over again, only to be thawed out when Hydra needed to send him out to kill somebody. But eventually he would cross paths with Steve Rogers and the old memories would come flooding back to him. He would fight back against his Hydra programming and turn to become a good guy, even if he had to fight Iron Man to do it. Number 7, Hawkeye. Man, to think that one of the main members of the MCU used to be a bad guy, I mean, like, it's not that hard to believe now, but when you see him break down in Avengers Endgame and start chasing down gangs in Tokyo, then it all starts to make sense how this guy can have a dark side. But the first couple of times that we see Hawkeye show up, he was working with Black Widow, someone who actually we'll be mentioning later on this list. She would get him to tag along on missions where the two of them had to take down the flying tin can man known as Iron Man. But there wasn't enough hate in Hawkeye's heart to keep him on the dark side, and he eventually swapped over to work with the heroes, and since then, he hasn't looked back. Number 6, Loki. Now, never an official member of the Avengers, I mean, he didn't stand with them when every hero in the MCU teamed up to storm Thanos' army and save the universe, but he did some of the most heroic acts that set everything up so the Avengers could save the day. He summoned Surtur so that he could take out Hela, he teamed up with Thor to save the people of Asgard, and he even threw his life on the line to try and kill Thanos. The guy's time as a hero is pretty short-lived, but he did come through when it counted, and I think the Avengers will look back at him as one of the most heroic members of them all. Just saying. Number 5, Red Hulk. I really love the Hulk's villains. I mean, you have the leader, which kind of represents the opposite of the Hulk, all brains with very little brawn. But then so many of his other villains are just like him, but slightly different, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Let's just get 2 cannonballs and fire them at each other and see what happens. Boom. The results are usually pretty explosive. Well, if you didn't know, Red Hulk is the general who always wanted the Hulk dead. Thaddeus Ross. I guess he went down the if you can't beat him, join him line, thinking that when it came to taking out the big green beast, he was actually able to keep his identity a secret, but once it was finally revealed who he was, it would be Captain America that would team up with him. With the 2 of them having a military background, it kind of made sense. It also made sense for the Red Hulk to become a hero. I mean, Thaddeus wasn't that far off in his quest to stop the Hulk, even though the big green beast is a force for good most of the time. He would be seen as a threat to everybody else around him. And Thaddeus seemed to have better control over his version of the Hulk than Bruce ever did. Number 4, Namor. It doesn't matter what comic book universe you're in, you gotta have a fish dude. That's just a staple of how everything works, that's it. And for the Marvel Universe, we of course have Namor. The Submariner, he was actually one of the original villains in Marvel. The dude's pretty old, with his first comic coming out in 1939. He's the ruler of Atlantis, and he didn't like the way things were handled on the surface, so he decided to duke it out with the people walking on land. Turns out that he wasn't a match for the people on the surface, so he decided to join them. He would eventually team up with the Avengers, but even though he was now fighting side by side with them, he's always had a superiority complex when it comes to dealing with surface-dwelling super people. And even though the Avengers saw him as an ally, when push came to shove, he would ditch them and team with the X-Men to try and take down the Avengers. He even flooded Wakanda, which seems like a bit of an overreaction. He's always had a sore spot when it comes to the Black Panther. I think maybe it's because he hates seeing a surface civilian as advanced as Atlanteans. Could be. Number 3, Tattoo. AKA Christine Korn, she made her first comic book debut in New X-Men issue 126. She's a student of the Xavier Institute, and she's known as Tattoo, well, because her mutation allows her to display messages or designs on her skin. And if that's not cool enough, she can phase through matter. So, coolest mutant ever, okay? She is also one of the Omega Gang members, and one time, her and the other members, led by Quentin Quire, started a riot at Xavier Institute during opening day celebrations. So Tattoo actually phased her hand into Cyclops' head, and then told him that if she became solid, he wouldn't survive to see the end of it. But then, Emma Frost reverted the trick by turning into Diamond, and then putting her hand into Tattoo's head to prevent her from taking out Cyclops. What a confusing sight to see. Superheroes are so cool. And at one point, she also attacked Beast and Wolverine, but she was being controlled by Cassandra Nova, so. Number 2, Rachel Summers. She's the daughter of Scott Summers and Jean Grey in an alternate universe on Earth 811, and she makes her first appearance in X-Men 141, the Days of Future Past story. So she was born from the Phoenix Force merging with Jean, so she got the abilities of a telepath and of a telekinetic. She was raised at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters when she met Franklin Richards and became really close. Now one day the school was attacked by federal troops, and she was one of the only survivors. She was taken in by the crazy Ahab, where she was brainwashed and became the mutant Hound, where she used her psionic powers to hunt down other mutants. Her time as this horrible mutant hunter weighed heavy on her conscience afterwards. I mean, she even got her face marked up by these guys. It was just an all bad situation. And finally, number 1, Pyro. Pyro was once a student at the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, and in X2, we see him hanging out with Iceman and Rogue. By the end of the movie, he switches over to Magneto's side, facing off against Bobby. And in the comics, Simon Lasker makes his first appearance as Pyro in X-Men Gold, Volume 2, Issue 1, when Mesmero tricks him into believing he's Charles Xavier, and he joins the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. So not good on screen, not good in the comic books. Still a cool character, just likes to dip into the dark side.
Number 10, all-female X-Men. Oddly enough, this book didn't do as hot as expected, despite the fact that it was an awesome powerhouse team composed of all ladies. This team was first introduced in 2013's X-Men series in issue number 1, as one of the main X-Men teams, and the series was part of the Marvel Now event. The team featured Kitty Pryde, Rogue, Rachel Summers, Jubilee, and Psylocke, with Storm as the leader. This team was the first in the history of the X-Men to be an all-female team with its own book. So while it was not a commercial success, it's still an important part of X-Men history to be noted for sure. Number 9, Chuck Austin's Uncanny X-Men. At least, I kind of hope you've never heard of this one, because if you have, you probably just forgot about it after years of trying, and now I'm traumatizing you by bringing it back up. This is the team that featured Stacy X. Yeah. I like Stacy X, but I can also see why her character and this run were super problematic. Austin's run on Uncanny X-Men began in issue 410 and ran till issue 443. The problem here wasn't so much to do with the members of the team as the subject matter. Many people feel that Austin's run was hypersexual, and he also gave us the revelation that Nightcrawler's dad was Azazel, which honestly isn't that terrible, but then he also gave us the weird Draco storyline with the X-Men versus the NAFM, which was something. It was a time. All in, this was definitely a controversial run, especially considering the relationship between Husk and Angel. The team was made up of Archangel, Beast, Iceman, Nightcrawler, Stacy X, Wolverine, and Professor X himself to start, but it would later on feature Husk, Polaris, Northstar, Juggernaut, and Havoc. Before we move on to this next spot, just a quick little reminder to click that like button if you haven't already, it really does help us out. Number 8, Children of the Atom. You might not have heard of this one because it isn't even out yet, but this is one of the new teams and books that we had expected to see earlier this year, but due to the global pandemic was delayed and is now delayed again. Originally it was moved to January of 2021, but now we aren't expected to see it till April of 2021. Boy, that is a long wait. But just because they aren't around yet doesn't mean we can't talk about them. And if you haven't heard of this team yet, you might want to keep your eye out for when their book is released. Children of the Atom is a team of new teen mutants who are basically X-Men superfans and are trained by these very famous original mutants. Technically, the X-Men team was never meant to exist in Krakoa, as was just revealed recently in the comics, despite them having their own book as part of the Dawn of X line. I know, it's a little confusing. So it'll be interesting to see how the Children of the Atom, who are being advertised as kind of X-Men sidekicks, fit in exactly. In a world where, you know, there's not really supposed to be X-Men? Well, we have yet to meet the members of this team. We do know some of them not only have similar costumes to the classic X-Men, but also have similar powers. Number 7, Hellions. No, not that Hellions. This Hellions. In fact, Empath's look in the new Hellions was a throwback to the original Hellions team outfits. Empath was also an original member of the team. Before we saw the team revived in Dawn of X, they were Emma Frost's team. Basically her version of a teenage mutant team similar to, well, the New Mutants. We're also a teenage mutant team. Every time I say teenage mutant team, I just want to say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but that's not what we're talking about. Although they are also a teenage mutant team. In comparison to the new Hellions, these Hellions were not as crazy, but were somewhat troublemakers, who had an ongoing, sometimes friendly rivalry with the New Mutants themselves. The team consisted of Empath, Beef, Bevatron, Cat's Eye, Roulette, Tarot, Thunderbird, Jetstream, and Firestart. The team was first introduced in New Mutants issue number 16 in the 1980s and was disbanded in 2009 in the comics after most of them were basically slaughtered, victims of a surprise attack. The team has returned since, but the new Hellions team only shares one member of the original roster, Empath. Number 6, X Corporation. Many people may have forgotten the existence of X Corporation since the organization was destroyed and became defunct back in the early 2000s, but they are coming back, so it's a pretty good time to remind everyone of their existence. Reminder, X Corp is still a thing. This actually just happened in the comics during the Empire event when we saw for certain that Xavier had revived the X Corp and that Monet and Angel seem to be running this branch of mutant affairs. X Corp in the past has been a non-for-profit organization working to help mutants in their fight for rights in less bold ways than what the X-Men are usually up to. It also provided a place of refuge for mutants who needed it, until the global organization had their various branches targeted and blown up around the globe following the events of M-Day. X-Corp will be getting their own book in the Dawn of X line, which I am way too excited about. I just want to see Angel get a moment in the spotlight, you know? Many believe the book to have been cancelled, but Jonathan Hickman actually confirmed early in December that it is still very much a go. Number 5, X-Men The End. In this series, we saw a bunch of teams kind of come together, ending in one big one, and Chris Claremont's The End. I like this X-Men team as well because although she died pretty early on in terms of her appearance here, we also get a shout out at least to Dust. And Dust is such an underrated X-Men in my opinion. This comic also introduces us to the future daughter of Bishop and Deathbird, Aaliyah Bishop. The final X-Men team features Kitty Pryde, Wolfsbane, Karma, Northstar, Dust, Martha Johansson aka No Girl, the Cuckoos, Cyclops, and a subgroup known as the Heavy Hitters, which features Wither, Frenzy, Polaris, Juggernaut, and Kid Colossus. Number 4. The Upstarts. Speaking of young mutant teams that are lesser known like the Hellions, we also have their straight up not friendly at all rivals, the Upstarts. The Upstarts were definitely a more villainous crew in comparison to the Hellions, just in general, as their whole goal was to basically kill mutants. The Upstarts were a mutant team created by Selene, the Black Queen of the Hellfire Club. She put the team together in order to test the members, getting them to compete for points which would be awarded whenever they killed mutants, based on the mutants' power set. Originally, the young group of mutants involved were unnamed and were promised that whoever got the most points would win a prize, which remained a mystery pretty much through all of the comics that they were featured in. I bet it's cake, and I bet it's a lie. Although I think it was also mentioned at one point somewhere that it was immortality, so in case you were wondering, for realsies. Number 3. Battle of the Atom Future X-Men. While everyone might focus on the Battle of the Atom Future Brotherhood team, as Raze has a tendency to steal the show, plus My Girl Zorn Jean, and also featuring Molly Hayes, people tend to forget about the awesomeness that was the Future X-Men team. The real X-Men team. This team featured a much more skilled Iceman, who now was known as Ice Wizard, Wiccan, who had become Sorcerer Supreme, Chimera, who is believed to be Storm's daughter that she had with Black Panther, Shogo, Jubilee's son, known as Sentinel X, Colossus armed with Magic Soul Sword, Kid Omega as Phoenix, and Jubilee as Wolverine. Number 2. Extreme Sanctions Executive, the other XSE. This team also spiraled out of the team that we talked about previously on part 1 of this list, Extreme X-Men. XSE here stands for the Extreme Sanctions Executive. Similar to the original XSE that Bishop was a part of in the future, this team is also like a military police force meant to maintain and in some cases enforce peace is kept between mutants and humans. Storm was asked to create the team by the United Nations and eventually would increase its numbers by recruiting the rest of her X-Men, making this team another government-sanctioned mutant team, like X-Factor was, and still one of the first of those types of teams. Team members have included Bishop, Cannonball, Magma, Rachel Summers is on every team, I love it, Psylocke, Rogue, Sage, Wolverine, X-23, and Gambit. Number 1. X-Animals. If you're an intense X-Men fan, you may be familiar with Mojo's X-Babies, but are you familiar with his other attempts at recreating or recasting Marvel's 616 X-Men after they were believed dead? One such team that attempted to step in was the X-Animals. This was a team of, well, animals, who each took on the role of a different mutant member of the X-Men. We've got a skunk standing in for Rogue, a bulldog for Wolverine, a pig for Dazzler, a rabbit as Havoc, a cat for our Storm, which I kinda love, a bird, possibly a hawk as Longshot, an otter as Psylocke, and a gorilla as Colossus. Sadly, this team was not acceptable as a replacement in Mojo's opinion, and he got rid of them. But I'd love to see them return at some point, if that's possible.